Nós, estudantes do curso de Relações Internacionais da PUC São Paulo e integrantes do Grupo de Estudos sobre Conflitos Internacionais, em parceria com o Democracy Now!, apresentaremos as principais notícias da semana.
A partir de agora, com legendas em português, vincularemos os principais destaques internacionais.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
People can come in, but they have to come in through the ports of entry, and that to me is a very important thing. We're not letting them in, but they're trying to flood our country.
Once again, a federal judge blocks a Trump ban on migrants, this time Trump's asylum ban, weeks after the president announced new immigration rules to deny asylum to migrants who enter the country outside ports of entry. We'll speak with one of the lawyers who sued the Trump administration over the ban, Center for Constitutional Rights legal director Bahar Azmi. Then, less than a month after a gunman opened fire at a Pittsburgh synagogue, killing 11 Jewish worshippers, we speak with investigative reporter A.C. Thompson on the rise of neo-Nazis in America.
Over the past few years, I've been reporting on a resurgent white supremacist movement. I've seen its ideas migrate into the mainstream. I've seen violence in cities across the country. And now this, what looks to be the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history. And I fear there will be more to come.
On the same day Robert Bowers opened fire in the Pittsburgh synagogue, a neo-Nazi he was communicating with took his own life in Washington, D.C. The man's brother has since been arrested on weapons charges. The brothers were both linked to the violent white supremacist group Atomwaffen. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A federal court in California put a temporary halt Monday to President Trump's order denying asylum to anyone who enters the United States outside a legal port of entry. Trump announced the move earlier this month, apparently in response to the Central American migrant caravans he turned into a major flashpoint in the run-up to the midterm elections. U.S. District Judge John Tiger, who ruled on the case, wrote, "Whatever the scope of the president's authority, he may not rewrite the immigration laws to impose a condition that Congress has expressly forbidden. Failure to comply with entry requirements, such as arriving at a designated port of entry, should bear little, if any, weight in the asylum process," unquote. After headlines, we'll speak about Trump's asylum ban with Bahar Azmi of the Center for Constitutional Rights. The Trump administration will begin to draw down the nearly 6,000 troops stationed at the U.S.-Mexico border as early as this week, with all active-duty military expected to leave their stations within a month. In the run-up to the midterm elections, President Trump deployed military troops to the border to protect against what he called an invasion of Central American migrants, at one point suggesting he could send up to 15,000 troops. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis visited soldiers last week and admitted there was no clear long-term plan for the military deployment. This comes as CNN is reporting President Trump is planning to grant new authority to troops to use military force against migrants if they determine the migrants pose a threat of violence to Border Patrol officers. The Pentagon had previously denied a request from Homeland Security to allow troops to perform law enforcement duties, which could constitute a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. As more migrants from several Central American caravans arrive at the Mexican border city of Tijuana, some local residents are protesting their presence, echoing language used by President Trump, referring to the migrants as an invasion and chanting Mexico first. Some demonstrators clashed with police as they protested outside a migrant shelter Sunday. This is Honduran migrant Karina Morzales addressing the recent protests.
They have the right to protest because they don't like that we're here. But in spite of everything, they, the Mexicans, are good people. They are the same as us, but we're only passing through. We won't stay here.
An estimated 3,000 Central American migrants are in Tijuana to request asylum in the United States, with more arrivals expected in the coming days. In Chicago, a gunman shot and killed 3 people at Mercy Hospital Monday. The victims include a doctor, a police officer, and a pharmacy technician. The gunman was also killed at the scene. Chicago police said the shooter was previously in a relationship with the first victim, Dr. Tamara O'Neill, who was shot outside the hospital in the parking lot before the shooter ran inside the hospital when police arrived on the scene. The other two victims were identified as pharmacy resident Dana Less and police officer Samuel Jimenez. The majority of domestic violence deaths involve firearms. A study by the gun control advocacy group Every Town for Gun Safety found the majority of mass shootings between 2009 and 2016 were committed by intimate partners or family. Earlier this month, doctors around the country started sharing photos of bloodied scrubs and operation rooms on social media after NRA told doctors to, quote, stay in their lane after the release of new recommendations from the medical community to reduce gun violence. The photos went viral on social media with the hashtags "Stay in my lane" and "This is my lane." The death toll for the Northern California Camp Fire has now reached at least 79. The number of missing persons has dropped to 700. The wildfire is now 70% contained as search and rescue efforts continue in Paradise, which was decimated by the flames, with nearly 12,000 homes destroyed and over 150,000 acres burned. With area shelters filled to capacity, displaced residents now face the question of where to go. Hundreds of people living in a Walmart parking lot in the city of Chico were asked to leave over the weekend, although many camps were still up Monday. This is displaced resident Amy Shepard.
As of right now, we're just making it day by day, hoping that we can get back up to our property and start to rebuild our lives again. So now life is very hard, especially with the little ones, trying to keep them happy and healthy and fed. And the food has been given free by so many sources. People are just outsourcing everywhere. They're coming with food. And so that's not been a problem. As clothing too, they're helping with.
Meanwhile, rain is forecast in Northern California from Wednesday through Friday, prompting a flash flood warning for the region as major storms threaten to further complicate living conditions for those sleeping outdoors, as well as hamper ongoing search efforts. The Washington Post reports the Justice Department considered breaching the confidentiality of U.S. Census data and sharing the information with law enforcement officials. A 2017 email between a Justice Department attorney and the acting Assistant Attorney General John Gore reportedly suggested avoiding questions from a Democratic Congress member about whether census data could ever be shared with law enforcement in case, quote, related issues come up later for renewed debate, unquote. This comes as several lawsuits are challenging the Trump administration's efforts to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census. Advocates say the move could deter immigrants from completing the census and could impact everything from redrawing of congressional maps to the allocation of federal funds. The Guardian is reporting members of the billionaire Sackler family could soon face criminal investigations over their role in fueling America's opioid epidemic. Prosecutors in Connecticut and New York are considering charges of fraud and racketeering against the Sacklers, whose company Purdue Pharma produces the prescription painkiller OxyContin. Earlier this year, the New York Times reported Purdue executives knew OxyContin was highly addictive as early as 1996, the first year after the drug hit the market, but still promoted it as less addictive than other opioids. A lead attorney taking on Purdue Pharma, Paul Hanley, said of the Sacklers, quote, "This is essentially a crime family, drug dealers in nice suits and dresses." The Sacklers are known worldwide for their patronage of the arts, and the Sackler name appears on museum exhibitions, including the Metropolitan Museum in New York and the Tate in London. The Washington Post is reporting White House senior advisor and presidential daughter, Ivanka Trump, used a personal email account and private email servers to send hundreds of messages to cabinet officials and aides in violation of federal records rules. Ivanka reportedly sent the emails through a domain name she shared with her husband, Jared Kushner, who's also a senior White House advisor. When questioned by other White House officials over the practice, Ivanka Trump reportedly said she was unfamiliar with some details of the rules. Ahead of the 2016 election, Donald Trump repeatedly led chants of "lock her up" at campaign rallies as he attacked his opponent Hillary Clinton over her use of a private email server she used as Secretary of State. In Texas, Democrat Gina Ortiz-Jones conceded to Republican incumbent Will Hurd Monday in a congressional race Democrats had hoped to flip. So far, Democrats have claimed 37 seats in the House of Representatives in these new elections. 3 Democratic senators are suing to remove Matt Whitaker from his role as acting attorney general, saying the appointment is unconstitutional and aimed at derailing special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. In a statement, Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said, quote, "The stakes are too high to allow the president to install an unconfirmed lackey to lead the Department of Justice, a lackey whose stated purpose, apparently, is undermining a major investigation into the president," unquote. Joining the lawsuit are Senators Mazie Hirono of Hawaii and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. 16 Democratic Congress members and Congress members-elect released a letter Monday saying they oppose Nancy Pelosi's bid to resume her role as House Speaker in January. They write they're, quote, "committed to voting for new leadership in both our caucus meeting and on the House floor," unquote. 2 of the letter's signatories are in races that have yet to be called. Pelosi will need 218 votes in order to secure the House leadership position. So far, no challengers to Pelosi have been announced. Long-serving Congressmember John Lewis has joined other lawmakers in supporting incoming New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's call for a Green New Deal. Lewis is the highest-profile Congress member so far to back Ocasio-Cortez's resolution to create a bipartisan committee that would work on a plan to bring the U.S. to a carbon-neutral economy and adopt 100% renewable energy. The proposal for the committee also seeks to bar lawmakers who've accepted money from the fossil fuel industry. Other lawmakers who support the formation of the committee include Congressmembers Ro Khanna, Carolyn Maloney, and the incoming Deb Haaland, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
So is it the most gravest moment in my life? Yes, but also in all of human history.
Today, Noam Chomsky for the hour on the twin threats of nuclear war and climate change, the election of the far-right former Army Captain Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and how U.S. foreign policy in Latin America has led to the migrant crisis.
And you have this incredible charade taking place, which the world is looking at with utter astonishment. Poor, miserable people, families, mothers, children, fleeing from terror and repression for which we're responsible. And in reaction, they're sending thousands of troops to the border.
We'll also speak with Professor Chomsky about the deadly attack on the Pittsburgh synagogue, the crisis in Gaza, and the U.S.-backed Saudi war in Yemen. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, we spend the hour with Noam Chomsky, the world-renowned professor, linguist, and dissident. Democracy Now!'s Nermeen Sheikh and I recently spoke to Chomsky in Tucson, Arizona, where he now teaches at the University of Arizona. He's also Institute Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he has taught for more than half a century. I began by asking Professor Chomsky about President Trump's National Security Advisor, John Bolton's recent praise of Brazil's newly elected far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain who's embraced Brazil's former military dictatorship and has a history of making racist, misogynistic, and homophobic comments.
Well, it's entirely natural for Bolton to welcome Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is definitely his kind of guy. He's vicious, brutal, a strong supporter, enthusiastic supporter of torture. He was a little bit critical of the military dictatorship because it didn't kill enough people. He thought it should have killed 30,000 people like the Argentine dictatorship, which was the worst of the U.S.-backed dictatorships in Latin America. He wants to throw the country open to investors, turn Brazil into a kind of a caricature of a country. This includes opening up the Amazon to his agribusiness supporters. It's a serious blow, if not even a death knell, to the species. Means genocide, virtual genocide for the indigenous population. According to Bolsonaro, they don't deserve a square centimeter. But by and large, just the kind of guy that Bolton would greatly admire.
Among the cabinet ministers that Bolsonaro is likely to appoint is Paulo Guedes. Could you say something about his background? He's going to be Bolsonaro's chief financial advisor, the head of this so-called super ministry, combining the current planning, finance, and industry ministries. What is this person's background?
Well, Guedes is an ultra right-wing Chicago economist. He's spent time in Pinochet's Chile. He's been very frank and open in interviews in the Brazilian press about his plans. It's very simple, as he puts it, privatize everything. Everything, infrastructure, anything you can think of. The motive is to pay off the debt which is owned by the predatory financial institutions that have been robbing the country blind. This will give away the resources of the country for the future. And as I mentioned, one part of it is Bolsonaro's favorite program of opening the Amazon to agribusiness. So that's he's exactly the kind of person who succeeded in driving Chile's economy to utter disaster within only a few years. It's rarely remembered that when the Chicago boys took over the Pinochet economy, they had every conceivable advantage. There couldn't be any dissent. The torture chambers took care of that. They had the advice of the top stars of the Chicago economics, right-wing economics system. They were clever enough not to privatize the one of the major bases of the Chilean economy, the highly efficient nationalized copper corporation, the biggest in the world, Codelco. So they really had every conceivable advantage. And within about 5 years, they had created such an economic disaster that the state had to take over the economy. People, as a joke, used to call it the Chicago Road to Socialism. They've left a residue which is pretty bitter. The pension system doesn't work. The educational system's collapsed. So this is the man who's one of their great admirers is now taking over the Brazilian economy. And it will be a heyday for investors. Stock market loves it. They think they'll be able to rob freely. Brazil does have enormous wealth and resources, which they're glad to get their hands on. For the future of Brazil, it's a disaster, I think. For the region, quite harmful. One of the things that Guedes has already said is that they may pull Brazil out of Mercosur, the South American trade system that had been established, that in fact Lula had pushed forward. And for the world, it'll also be a potential disaster, destroying. If they proceed to destroy the Amazon, that is a very serious attack on the environment. But again, that's just in line with Bolton, Trump, exactly what they're doing right here. It's their counterpart to recently opening up huge areas of the West for further exploitation of fossil fuels to accelerate the race to disaster, which is not very far off. So again, two peas in a pod, they should get along fine with one another.
During an interview with a Brazilian TV program in 1999, Jair Bolsonaro said, "Through the vote, you will not change anything in this country. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It will only change, unfortunately, when one day we start a civil war here and do the work that the military regime did not do, killing some 30,000, starting with FHC, then President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, not kicking them out, killing. If some innocent people are going to die, fine. In any war, innocents die." That's a quote from Bolsonaro from 20 years ago. But the description of what he is known for in Brazil right now, for decades he's openly praised the country's former military dictatorship, once saying the dictatorship should have killed 30,000 more people, as we just heard. He also has a history of making racist, misogynistic, homophobic comments, has spoken in favor of torture, threatened to destroy, imprison, or banish his political opponents, has encouraged police to kill suspected drug dealers, once told a female lawmaker she was too ugly to rape. He also said he would rather hear his son had died in a car crash than learn that his son is gay. You were just recently in Brazil, where you also visited Lula in jail, one of the few people who've been able to do that, high-profile people, and actually speak about it to the press after. Talk about who exactly Bolsonaro is. Are you afraid that the country will descend into a military dictatorship? And where Lula stands in all this today?
Well, let's start with Lula. There has been a long, slow, right-wing, what's often called soft coup. One step was impeaching the president, Dilma Rousseff, 2013. She was impeached on derisory charges by a parliament of thieves. The most dramatic vote for impeachment was, in fact, Bolsonaro's. When he voted for impeachment, he dedicated his vote to the chief torturer of the military regime, who, in fact, had been responsible for the torture of Dilma Rousseff herself. So that was his dedication when he voted for the ridiculous impeachment. It's a competitor for one of his most vile moments. There's plenty of competition. The next step was to ensure that Lula would be put out of commission. He was far and away the most popular political figure in Brazil, so in order to carry off the right-wing soft coup, it's necessary to get rid of him. He was sent to prison for 12 years, virtually a life sentence, solitary confinement, barred from receiving books, press, or journals, and crucially, the courts decided not permitted to make a public statement, unlike, say, a convicted murderer. So he's silenced, put away. Then comes the next step, there has been a major, in fact, I think he should be regarded as probably the most important political prisoner in the world today. Then came, there had been for years, by the media oligopoly, which is quite right-wing, demonization of his party, the Workers' Party, PT. Towards the end of the campaign, there was a massive increase in demonization and lies over social media, which was utterly scandalous. That's where most Brazilians get their information, so-called. And it was, I should say that you should look at the charges against Lula, for which he was sentenced to this imprisonment and permanent silencing. he was charged with an accusation on a plea bargain, already dubious, that he had been offered an apartment which he never lived in and to which he didn't have a key. Well, okay, that's something. Maybe you get a tap on the wrist. But what was done was so utterly disproportionate to the nature of the alleged crime, and that, given the timing, makes it clear that, pretty clear, I think, that he should simply be regarded as a political prisoner, last step in this soft coup. I should say that the PT gave an opportunity to the right wing to carry off these maneuvers that we've been seeing. They did. We should recognize that the years of Lula's tenure in office are what the World Bank called a golden decade, a unique period in Brazil's history in which there was enormous progress in reducing poverty and social inclusion, new opportunities for the oppressed. So that's the golden decade. That's been completely suppressed. But at the same time, the PT, regrettably, did not make significant changes in the structural system under which Brazil and much of Latin America has suffered for a long time. Elites in Latin America simply have no responsibility for the welfare of the country. They don't pay taxes, export capital, import luxury goods, radically different, say, from East Asia, which has developed with much less resources. And the PT did nothing to change this. They also did nothing to open up more possibilities for a less monopolized media, which would have other voices. And very unfortunately, they fell prey to the corruption which is endemic in the Brazilian political class. Bad enough, not to the extent of their accusers, but bad enough. And all of that has given an opportunity for the far right to carry out this process that I just described, which led to the election of the most malicious and vicious creatures of the current range of pretty ugly characters that we see around the world.
Nosso programa fica por aqui. Você pode acompanhar a gente pela nossa página no Facebook ou pelo blog Terra em Transe.
Nos vemos na próxima semana. Até lá!